Because, Kevin and Emil, we always share the webinars afterward on the website. So you can see some of the previous webinars if you're interested. They've all been recorded.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah, if you're interested. Okay, I'll go ahead and get started then. Everyone is ready? Okay. Hello, and thank you for coming today. My name is Lindsay. I'm a master's student here at Bishop's. I'd like to begin today's webinar by acknowledging that Bishop's University is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Abenaki people. Today's guest speaker is Melanie Wong, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. She is an assistant professor of teaching at the University of British Columbia. She is a former K-12 educator for the Calgary Board of Education, where she worked in various positions. Her last position was as a system English language learner strategist. She is passionate about supporting K-12 English language learners in teacher education, and her research focuses on K-12 technology enhanced classrooms. So today, today's webinar will explore how to intentionally plan for your multilingual learners based on the current research. It will discuss how to bridge home and school environments using digital technologies as a tool. And with that, I will pass it over to Melanie.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited about doing this. It's so good to see all of you virtually. So I got to be honest with you. It has been a while since I've used Teams. I think the last time I used Teams was when, for a webinar purpose, was actually when I was in my school district in 2020 December. So that's the last PD session I did. So hopefully, fingers crossed. Like yesterday, I was a little nervous and thinking, oh gosh, I hope the sound works. So it seemed to work. So we're gonna hold that to me that it's gonna work. Can everyone see my screen right now?
Yeah.
Perfect. And I'm just gonna put that in full screen, and hopefully it will allow it to go. Lindsay, is it good?
Full screen.
Perfect. Okay. So thanks so much for that wonderful introduction, Lindsay. And again, my session is titled, So My Students Are Using Technology Outside of the Classroom. What does that mean for me in the classroom, connecting research to practice? So for me as a teacher educator, that's probably the most important thing is like, how do I connect research and what I know is good research practice and put it into practice? So this is really the intent of this particular presentation, to really sort of bridge that what's research and how could that be really useful in your own practice. So I know Lindsay did a land acknowledgement, but I feel like it's very important that I do a land acknowledgement because I'm coming from a very different land. So I do want to take a moment and acknowledge that I'm currently an uninvited guest on the unceded and traditional territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam peoples. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this in my presentation, but with my research recent work actually in place-based literacies, I've really been reflecting on the 4 R's in an effort to really engage in decolonization. So as part of that reflective step towards reconciliation. So today I want to focus on the notion of respect in this short land acknowledgement. But if you're ever on UBC campus in Vancouver, our campus, you might have noted that there's actually these signs that are all over. So if you ever get a chance to come, please do make sure that you sort of look for these signs. So these signs are reminders of, and also opportunities for us to engage in critical reflection. And as I look at this particular sign, of this image, first I want to note that the backward text of British Columbia, which is a symbolic and also critical to reflect on. British Columbia is probably the most colonial name I've ever heard, but it's also the fact that we need to really shift our institutional structures, which are often backwards and colonial, and hence why that is a backwards British Columbia. And second, the host of our actual the land that we're currently on at UBC campus is Musqueam land. So our host is Musqueam people, and host really indicates to me that we are guests and uninvited. So therefore, I do want to reflect back to those 4 R's and this notion of respect rather, and how we need to respect our Indigenous hosts, no matter where we are, and which includes listening and recognizing that we are we're not just the only ones there, and that we can actually impact others when we are on the land. So that's something that I wanted to share with you today with my land acknowledgement. But here are my learning intentions. So this actually comes from Fry and Fisher work, and this comes back when I was in the school district. We always started every lesson and every conversation and every professional development I'd ever done with this notion of learning intentions. So today, as I used to always do in my school district, I want to start off and let you know what I'm hoping to do during this session. So I'm going to give a brief introduction, and I know Lindsay has introduced me, but I think I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more so you know where I'm coming from. But again, the whole purpose of this session is to connect research to practice, and really starting with professional development, how it matters. I know that's very core and key. Looking at my research in technology enhanced classrooms and what does that mean for you in the classrooms, there's been a big push right now, especially with technology and digital literacies, to think about AI and what are the implications for our English language learners in particular. I want to move a little bit and have a little short discussion around algorithms and big data. And then finally, I want to end our time together with a little bit of a brief discussion with place-based literacies. It seems like a lot, but I promise that there'll be lots of great ideas for you to think about how you might be able to put this in your own practice. So Lindsay already introduced me, but I'm just, again, going to sort of highlight a few things just so you get a little bit of background. I think it's important to know my positionality and where I came from and why I'm so interested in what I do. So I worked for the second largest school district in the country, the Calgary Board of Education. They have over 250 schools. And I had been in so many different settings, from elementary technology teacher, AC, which is Alberta Initiative for School Improvement. That was back in the day. They would pull teachers out and we would work with teachers to build their capacity. I was an ELL learning leader at a K-9 school, 1,200 children, 90% ELL. It was really wild. And I was their support. And then, as Lindsay had mentioned already, my last role, and I left the school district in December 2020, was a system ELL strategist. And at that time, there was only 2 of us running around the school district supporting 25,000 coded English language learners. So it was a little bit of a wild ride, but it really got me eye-opening experiences to get to know what English language learners' practices look like in different contexts, and really get an understanding about how we might be able to meet the needs of our ELL learners. So as already mentioned, my area really is technology enhanced learning. However, I have recently gotten really interested in place-based literacies, which links to technology enhanced learning. And I'll explain a little bit more about that too and how we're taking that up. And I'm just passionate about teacher education. So thank you so much for inviting me to come and speak to you today more specifically. So I want to start with an activity. And this is going to be interesting because I have multiple computers and I'm not quite ready for you yet because I'm going to press start on it. But what you're going to do, so if you are handy, you could either open a browser right now, or you could pull out your smartphone. That's totally up to you. But what I want to happen right now is we are going to start a little bit of a poll. I don't know if any of you are have you ever tried doing Lumio before? It's part of the SMART thing, and I'm trying to start it right now. Let's see if this works. It says it's waiting for students to connect. So your job right now is to go to either, you could scan that QR code, or you can go to hellosmart.com. You can enter as a guest. You can type the class ID 526026, which is currently on the screen. And the question for you is, how are you using digital technologies in your classroom? So whether you're in a post-secondary setting right now, or maybe you're doing a practicum class, or maybe you could even think about like the classes you're currently taking. How is digital technologies being used in your classrooms right now? And I see 6 of you are in there, so that's a good sign. I'm looking at 2 different computer screens. So give you a second there to answer that question. And I don't see anything flying on the screen yet, so that means you're still answering the question.
I have a message that says your teacher isn't running this activity right now.
Oh.
Same here. I have the same message.
Okay, let's try this one more time. That's interesting. I press start. Maybe it wants me to restart. Okay, let's try it again. Did it work now? I've refreshed your page. It should let you in. Perfect. Thank you. I see you in there, though. I see your names. So that's why I know that you're a great class. So thank you.
Melanie, would you mind terribly just repeating the question?
I was going to say the
The
same
question
thing.
is, and actually should have popped up when you went in there, but how are you using digital technologies in your classroom? So thinking about if it's a post-secondary classroom, it's fine. If it's your practicum class, or maybe you're not even in your practicum class yet, and you're maybe thinking about, okay, you know what, I'm just going to put something that we're doing in our current class that I'm taking. So how are you using digital technologies in your classroom? Okay, they're starting to pop up here. So some of the things I see right now is I like to use videos, music, Kahoot, interactive polls in my classroom. I use digital technologies, Moodle, Teams, YouTube to teach my online classes by using smartboards. Ooh, I love smartboards, iPads, Kahoot quizzes. So some of the examples. I will flip over here later and give you an opportunity to see what's going on. Basically, your answers just fly on the screen, but we're going to actually do another activity like this later. So I think at that point in time, I will flip over. But thank you so much for giving me a better idea of what's going on in your classrooms. That's amazing. So, okay, fingers crossed, everyone, that this is going to work for me. But I do want to take a moment and share a video with you to just sort of get our conversation rolling a little bit. Okay, I didn't hear anyone say anything, so the sound must have worked, so yay. But that was just a short video to sort of get you thinking about the fact that our students are doing a lot of different things outside of the classroom. And the reality is digital technologies is everywhere, even if we're not physically using it in our classroom context. So I think before I even start this, I think this is really important. This is something that's very dear to my heart, and I just want to point this out to you. Whether you are a experienced educator or you are new to our field, I think it's really important to sort of just highlight how professional development really matters. I think one of the things that I've seen in the literature over the years, and when I think about schools and the work that I've done with professional development, is if you want to expand sort of that technology integration in your schools, you need to have strong professional development. So yes, I can have all this great technology, but really it's not useful if teachers do not feel confident. And how do they integrate technology into practice if you don't spend some time and actually learn it? So this is, I guess, the shout out to all of you to really be thinking about, you know, if you really want to be taking up digital technologies in your classroom, like what are some options that I could be doing? And I think back to my own practice when I was a beginner teacher, and I remember them telling me, you're the tech teacher. And I was like, what? You want me to be the tech teacher? I know nothing. But I was really, really excited about going to take like a smartboard workshop if I heard about it, or something like, or other things, learning management systems. So I want to encourage you to really sort of think about how professional development needs to be intertwined into these discussions that I'm currently having with you. So I want to go back and shift our gear a little bit. So with some of us, we all sort of remember this notion of emergency remote learning. And really, I think the question right now is, how has your practice changed since emergency remote learning? If you have taught during that time? And what do you learn from this? Maybe you were experiencing emergency remote learning as a student. Like, how has that, so I want to invite you just to briefly in your mind, if you need to write something down, to sort of write it down and think about how your practice has changed, and maybe to just sort of get you thinking a little bit about that. And I'm going to flip through it because I have quite a bit to talk about in this, is when I think about emergency remote learning more specifically. I remember that March call, and I was in the school district at the time, and we were suddenly told we had to roll online. And we had never ever done this before. I mean, the school district I had was super tech, but we had never ever had all the children online. So at that point in time, we really needed to change how we taught and how we utilized technology to support the learners in our classroom context. So again, I want to invite you to sort of think about that. If you want to write something down, then please do. But I'm going to move forward. And I want to talk about two different studies and sort of the implications that will help you to think about, like, what could I do now with my classroom context based on it? So there are two online studies that I have been a part of. One of them, the first study, was actually my research with Dr. Graham Lee at the University of Manitoba. And this was during a remote learning. We actually did some research in a ballet school. So as you know, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And then the second study is actually my current research. So I just started this at the beginning of the school year, as in September, and formally recruited students. And I'm now currently in a fully online school doing a research study. So what do these two technology enhanced learning studies teach us? And so I'm going to briefly go over what they are. So before I even start, let's introduce these schools so that you get a little bit of a background about them. And they might remind you about schools that you are familiar with. So Giselle Academy is a ballet school. It's located in Western Canada. The study focused on grade 11 students, and many of the students, English is not their first language. And this study occurred during remote learning in 2021. Ada Lovelace School is a fully online K-12 school in Western Canada. It focuses on grade 4 students, and many of the students, English is not their first language. And again, I formally recruited students starting in October 2022, and this study is ongoing and it's going to end in June. So when I think about these two schools and I think about their context, I want you to think about your own teaching experiences. With Giselle Academy, because it was a very unique environment, they really look at embodied learning, because, you know, ballet is dance, right? So when I think about this sort of embodied learning, it was really critical that they had in person. So in order to sort of promote that in-person piece, even with the high COVID numbers, they were going from in-person, hybrid, remote, and then in-person, depending on how bad the COVID was. Now, on the flip side, we've got Ada Lovelace School, which is a fully online school. However, they do have the option for students to go in person if they want to for a day once a month. So they have sort of those experiences. So thinking about these two contexts, what have I learned from there? So with Giselle Academy, again, it's a very unique environment. You never know where you're going to end up teaching, right? So this school is an embodied learning type of environment, and focus is primarily on ballet. And it's funny because all of the teachers in that school, when they talked to me, they were like, the kids are here for the ballet. Academics is totally secondary. Yet at this school, what was really fascinating was how the teachers would talk about the learning. For teaching, for us, obviously for us, is to be able to help and guide the students. To be physically hands-on is part of what we do to train them to be safe and proper. And so that's a challenge. And we also find verbal correction, as they use verbal correction as well. So it's very like teacher directed learning. And even in the academic side and not just the ballet side, that was the case. Now, on the flip side, with my current study in an online school, we see some other differences. So the teacher that is part of the study has talked about how in my context, we jump right into the learning. We're really fast. Our time together is very precious. As a teacher, I set the expectations. We're going to jam pack these 30 minutes full of instruction and practice. The other thing that we notice here is in our class, we turn on our cameras. So there's very clear expectations being laid out here. So I want to give you this funny sort of illustrative example, first of all, to make you laugh a little bit, because I thought it was really funny. And second of all, also to sort of highlight how these online environments are very unique. They're not like our typical, and you never know where you're going to teach. Like I keep saying these to my teacher candidates, you might end up in an online school. Some of my teachers that I work with in my MEd program, they're now teaching in online schools, right? So with this online environment, Grape, I want to introduce you to Grape. She's an ELL student. So this is during remote learning, and they were learning about the Indigenous peoples in Canada. And you can see they're all on the screen. They have small group sort of classes, and some of the some of the students were actually in the same space together using one webcam because they were living in a certain place together. So that being said, I want to sort of focus my attention on one student there. Do you see how I put that that animation there? Okay, so this is great. And I found it really interesting, and I'm going to flip here and I'm going to talk. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not the best artist. I'm going to put out there. I wasn't an art teacher. I don't claim to fame with art, but I had to write these in my field notes. So what I was noticing with Grape and some of her classmates is during class time, and this is academic class time, they quite often would only show the eyes and you wouldn't see the rest of the body. And I was really curious about what was going on with that. So I obviously asked about it and had conversations about it, and it's been documented every single class that we'd been in. So what I learned there were certain, as we know in schools, there's certain rules, right? So kids were expected to wear uniforms at this school. The other thing that they were expected, there was no specific rules, but students could not eat during Zoom classes. Now, when I asked Grape about this is really fascinating. She said it was actually strategic. So what we need to know is kids are strategic when they're doing certain things, when they're performing in front of the camera in Zoom or in Teams or whatever you might be doing, or Google Meets. And most of the time, she said she was eating her breakfast. The other thing that I found really fascinating is another reason why is because they didn't want to follow the rules. They weren't wearing their uniform. So if she did this, you couldn't see her uniform or you couldn't see anything that was under that. So reason why I want to highlight this particular actual illustrative example is also partly is because it's very different in an online environment. And I want to highlight the things that we already know from remote. So the next little while, I just want to talk about what can we learn from this for our teaching practices. So one of the things that I know as a teacher, and for those of you that are working in post-secondary institutions right now, is we need to better prepare our teachers to teach in crisis situations. Both of these studies very much highlight how we are not preparing our teachers for that. Remote learning is very different than online learning. When we think about emergency remote learning, there's a reason why the emergency word is being placed in front of it. With online learning, what I noticed in my current study is we're very prepared for these situations. So with my ongoing study, it's about intentionally planning for our students. They talk about how they're going to use the breakout rooms effectively. So how are you going to make sure that you're planning environments and having discussions that are very thoughtful? So they'll practice it with their grade 4 kids and the kids across the school, right? They'll scaffold the lessons. There's no rocket science to this, but what we see is just very good, solid pedagogy being pushed back into an online environment. The other thing that I noticed with these two studies, and you highlighted that when I asked you to do a poll on Lumio, some of you are using Kahoots, right? And different type of smart boards and so forth. So both studies really highlights this range of digital technologies that are used to support ELL students. So one study used Zoom, the other one used Google Meets. They're both studies use Google Classrooms. The current one that I'm doing, they do a lot of Lumio, which you just saw actually at the beginning. That's what I was sort of modeling to you. And then Kahoot is also used. However, although these studies illustrate the wide range of digital technologies that can be used in a technology-enhanced classroom, it also illustrates how these technologies are also a tool for learning. They're not just the learning part of it, but it's actually a tool to support and engage our students more intentionally. So when I think about what I would want teachers to know about from this study and what I would have wanted to take from this into my own practice is when delivering classes in remote learning environments, it presents many different challenges. We know this already. It's tough. We were just joking before we started this webinar about how Teams, gosh, it's Teams, right? There's so many issues. I had issues with it the other day, right? So technology is not foolproof. There's definitely things that we need to learn. And that goes back to that professional development session type of thing that I was talking about earlier, that you may want to go and get yourself professionally developed, if you want to say. Go and take sessions on it, learn a little bit more about it. However, engaging students and supporting students afar is quite a challenge in these types of situations. With that ballet school, a lot of the kids ended up going back to their home countries, and that became a time zone challenge for them. So we need to sort of think about that too, right? Students were more successful with their learning where there were opportunities to socially interact with the others. So knowing that my study was primarily English language learners, what we can take from that is interaction is key. It's just like what we know from the research already. Oral language helps the reading and the writing. So give your kids opportunities to talk. And that was certainly documented in that. So like our face-to-face classrooms and in the virtual classroom, you want to create opportunities for that social interaction. The current study that I'm currently doing, they're very intentional about it. They have every Friday they have a discussion about digital citizenship, and it links back to like, how do I behave in a breakout room? So that's been sort of the theme that they've been having lately. And what we see there is this very much scaffolded type of lesson, and it's very effective. So other things that I would pull from my research that I want teachers to know about is that I've talked a lot about the known. And what I've turned about the known is that ELL students bring something that they know into the world. And it's critical in these virtual classrooms. So how can I gauge these students and their families when we are in remote environments? Hopefully not again, but you never know, right? So if I'm to prepare teachers for this or prepare myself for this, what would I do? Maybe I would have guest speakers in my virtual classroom. So family members who come to be interviewed. That sort of promotes that oral language opportunity. A while back on Facebook, you'll see on the left-hand side, and I screen captured it, there was a post, and they talked about how in Denmark they have libraries where you can borrow a person instead of a book to hear their life story. Why can't we do the same thing in our virtual communities? Like, that's bringing in those funds of knowledge and having opportunities to have conversations about kids. And you can do that even in a face-to-face classroom. Why would I not use the digital technologies that I have already available in my school district to bring and welcome guest speakers in from all over the place so kids can have conversations with them? You could have virtual story time. So one of the things that some of these online situations have happened is actually they've ended up bringing in family members and they're reading books to kids now at certain times of the day. Isn't that a beautiful way of sort of inviting, engaging our families in the classroom context? So digital technologies are really a tool to support learning. However, both teachers and students need to really have opportunities to play and learn about these tools. So rather than just going into a global crisis without trying and playing, why not have some time? And so if you are having opportunities to run professional development for teachers, play with the technology, learn it, so that you are prepared when it comes, and then you won't have to be like, I don't know how to use this. And that's okay. And you don't have to be the expert, right? The kids know something too as well. So we're going to do another quick poll. And this time I want to ask your, and I'm going to just end the old one and I'm going to start a new one. So the poll is going to be around ChatGPT. So some of you might have heard about this already, and maybe you haven't, but I just want to see how many of you know what ChatGPT is. And I see some of you have already logged in. That's perfect. So, and all of you know what it sounds like, you know what ChatGPT is. Perfect. So this is not new to you. So I want to take a moment again and watch a quick video to sort of talk about AI or artificial intelligence, just to give us a little bit of background. So hold on for a second here.
AI, or artificial intelligence, is all around us, whether we know we're interacting with it or not. AI refers to a collection of technologies that allow computers to sense, learn, reason, and act. But a far cry from the sci-fi promise of a humanoid robot that thinks like us, AI is currently only capable of specific individual tasks. AI powers the algorithms, the instructions encoded in computer programs that rank search results on the web, tag your friends in photos online, let a smart assistant understand the words you say, and recommend which movie to watch next. AI can also help detect diseases, identify fraudulent credit card purchases, and monitor threatened ecosystems and wildlife. How does AI work? One approach is called machine learning. Equipped with algorithms and vast amounts of data called datasets, AI developers train computer programs to recognize patterns and tackle complex problems. In many cases, machine learning algorithms called neural networks extract information from examples in the training dataset by searching for patterns in multiple steps called layers. Once a program has been trained on a dataset, it can then encounter new scenarios and start making predictions. For example, if the training dataset is a collection of labeled images of cats, and the algorithm instructs the program to identify a cat, a successful image recognition program could then correctly classify a new image as either a cat or not a cat. If a language generator were successfully trained on all of the English text in a library's collection of books and articles, It could then complete an unfinished sentence while obeying the rules of English grammar. This process is not transparent. We have yet to design algorithms universally capable of explaining how they arrive at a particular answer. So we can't know exactly what makes our program so sure it sees a cat, or how exactly it knows that whom is correct, not who. It is just applying its training after being shown a huge number of examples. AI is impressive, but not perfect. Its flaws reflect the data we choose to train AI algorithms, as well as other choices made by the humans who develop these technologies and send them out into the world. Some of these flaws, like those in tools that determine credit scores, evaluate access to healthcare, and even attempt to predict crime, greatly impact human lives. That essential training dataset is a key point of weakness where misconceptions and biases can and do routinely sneak in. Here are some real-world examples where an incomplete or unbalanced training dataset causes unfair outcomes. A self-driving car might not be able to identify a person using a wheelchair in a crosswalk if wheelchair users were not included in the data when it was trained. Facial recognition programs trained on images that disproportionately represent faces with lighter skin exclude people with darker skin tones. We have the power to reduce this embedded bias by creating AI training datasets that mirror the complexity of the real world and lead to equitable and inclusive outcomes, and by building a diverse workforce of AI developers and decision makers. We must also consider social, economic, and ethical priorities when deciding which problems to tackle with AI in the first place. Each of us lives in a world filled with AI. The more we all know about where and how these technologies influence our lives, the better we can advocate for ourselves and others, and reach for a more equitable world.
All right, so I just wanted to start with that little bit of a video from the Museum of Science, just to sort of highlight the discussion about what AI is. So I know many of you already know what ChatGPT is. So of course I go in and I ask ChatGPT what it is, and it gives me this very convoluted answer about what it is. But basically it is open AI. AI or artificial intelligence is not new. It's funny, I didn't realize AI would be such a big deal. When I looked at my dissertation data, way back when, and it was quite a few years ago, I actually had AI. So if you think that the kids aren't using AI, they actually are. And kids were actually in my data interacting with this online artificial intelligent chatbot. So there is these types of things that are floating around online, and the reality is that it is out there. I think it's just become really prominent now, especially with ChatGPT and the advances in terms of what ChatGPT can do. So again, it's everywhere. It's funny. I can't seem to get out of a conversation without going. I think in the month of like January alone, I went to like 6 webinars on ChatGPT alone. So I feel like, and then like and actually next 2 weeks from now, I'm going to be attending another webinar on this exact topic. So I think it's something that we can't get out of. But I do want to talk a little bit more specifically today, just briefly, about what are the implications for us as teachers, because it is hard for us not to be aware of it and not think about like, what could I do with this with my kids, or what could that do to help me? So what does this mean for me in the classroom? I think that's the biggest thing that I wanted to sort of talk with you today about. So of course, we've been playing around with ChatGPT. So I've entered different things in there. Can you please write me a poem? So I asked them to write me a poem about saying no, and it did a really great job of writing me a poem about saying no. However, I think as a teacher, there's so many different things that you can use ChatGPT for. And it doesn't necessarily always have to be negative, because I think what happens nowadays is people are saying, oh, ChatGPT, we're not going to have kids like plagiarizing and so forth. But sometimes I always think when we think about digital citizenship, for example, which is Mark Ribble's work, I think about digital citizenship and how we want to teach our K-12 students to be more aware of what's out there. So I can avoid it and I can say, hey, you can't use ChatGPT in my classroom because I think it's bad. or I can use it to teach kids critical literacy skills. So with our English language learners, there's so many different benefits for using ChatGPT, and I do want to talk a little bit more about that. So first of all, you can get it to generate text for you. Like, I don't know about you, but like as an English language learner teacher, I've always really found it difficult to find level text at various different levels to provide to my students. So this is like another tool I could use to do chat with ChatGPT more specifically. So an example would be like, I asked ChatGPT, I said, write a complicated text on ancient Greece. And of course it did it. It did it really well. But then what I did was I actually asked for a short paragraph. So I asked for a short paragraph on ancient Greece, and then I specifically gave it a reading level, and it gave me a much less complicated text that I could give to, say, a grade 3 student. So when you're looking at maybe potentially looking at leveled passages for your English language learners, this is a really great way of sort of getting them engaged in it and also using that. But I want to like sort of stress how we could use ChatGPT as potentially maybe a critical thinking opportunity. So with our ELL kids, we could be thinking about, like maybe I'll get them to write a paragraph about, okay, so this is what I asked it, write a paragraph on why students should not be allowed to bring cell phones to school. So something very simple that everyone can relate to. And then I might get my own students to write a paragraph as well. And what we could do is compare and contrast what does ChatGPT generated and what have they generated, and have a critical conversation about that. And I think there's something really nice about that, actually, to be honest. I have former colleagues that tell me that they're now using it to create rubrics, different things for teaching purposes. I mean, there's so many different ways to use ChatGPT, but I just wanted to highlight during this discussion that, don't write it off. Try it out with your kids. Use it as an opportunity to have digital citizenship conversations, and also use it as a critical thinking sort of opportunity where maybe you're like looking at, I don't know, curriculum-wise, the Iroquois Confederacy. I'm just making this up right now. So we'll get ChatGPT to write something, but I'll get my students to research it and write something out. And then maybe they're looking and say, okay, is this actually a genuine fact? Because what we have noticed with ChatGPT is sometimes the facts aren't always correct. So can we use this as an opportunity to have that conversation about why, yes, ChatGPT is an interesting tool, but we need to be critical about what it produces. And that could be a really great conversation to have with your kids. Okay. So I was going to show you this video, but rather than show you the video, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about it because I am mindful of our time. But I do want to tell you a little bit more about algorithms. So in that last video that you saw, they talked a lot about algorithms, and I think it's really critical as K-12 educators, whether you are doing digital literacy activities or not, to really engage your students in a conversation about algorithms and what is the implications for them in their real life. So this particular case study that was done in 2022 is really a beautiful case study. And I want to highlight this because I think it's something that you could take up in your own classroom context. It was done in a South Korean classroom. So these researchers, they looked at a project and it highlighted how to explicitly teach algorithms in your classroom. So as you recall from that video a little bit before I started talking about ChatGPT, algorithms are really quite elaborate, right? We can give them data sets and then it learns things and then it will suddenly produce like a video for you. Like, so if you go on YouTube, it tells you exactly, like, you might have watched something, and so that it sort of taps into, oh, these are the videos that this particular person might like. And then suddenly you learn a lot about that person through the algorithm. So let's talk a little bit more about how this might look like in your classroom and how you might be able to take it up. So with this study and with my own research, YouTube is really, really quite critical with K-12 students. You probably already know that too as well if you are working with K-12 kids, right? So I'm being bold here. I pulled up my own YouTube page, so you now know what I watch all day. But I was going to say that on YouTube, users are often shown a list of recommended videos, or these videos are chosen by an algorithm based on individual viewing records. So you can tell that I am a K-pop fan, watch lots of K-pop and K-dramas and so forth. So when you look at my YouTube page, you'll note the things that I'm enjoying. And I think that's sort of really interesting, and it's dangerous too. So we need to be really teaching our kids about this particular thing about algorithms. So when we go back to sort of that research study that I was talking about earlier, what they did was they were they were looking at a previously adapted educational game that Belgian researchers had done called In the Shoes of an Algorithm for high school students. And they were using this for a younger learner. And that's why I sort of want to highlight this, because whether you're teaching secondary or whether you're teaching elementary, you can sort of like do a similar activity. So the purpose of this game was really to highlight algorithms. So what they did was they did a game which looked at creating an algorithm that would appeal to a YouTube CEO. So in their data, which you can go and actually read this particular book chapter, the students were given guided activities that help the students to explore and realize that YouTube recommendations or algorithms has value, and there's values to it, but it's also like really very much open to revision. So they were given this sort of like persona, like a kid, that had a particular, like, so you learned a little bit about them, that they watched YouTube and what type of videos that they watched and so forth. So that's sort of that persona or their like actual case of what they do. Then, given that persona, they were supposed to come up with, the kids in the class were supposed to come up with a recommendation for a YouTube video, like what would YouTube recommend based on the persona and what that kid is actually watching. So, and their viewing habits. So the kids were given like video cards, and then they had to arrange them and discuss how these videos would appear on that person's YouTube page, recommendation page. And I think that's really nice, because now the kids are having a conversation about algorithm and critical algorithm literacy, which I think is really critical that we teach our students that. So moving forward with that, the kids at the end had to, like, you know, present this particular persona and this piece, this imaginary part to in a meeting with an imaginary YouTube employee. So we're getting kids again to sort of like do that. But I think this is something that is very nice. And I think it's also really highlighting to kids about how dangerous algorithms can be, how we need to be careful and mindful that what we do on the internet is not always private, that people are collecting data on us, and like from that, being more critical about what we're viewing and doing on the internet. So an activity such as this is quite important when we think about our K-12 kids. So again, implications being having a discussion about viewing habits on YouTube and hashtags. It makes it salient and more apparent to students about how algorithms and datification is a part of our daily lives. And again, it links back to that digital citizenship piece, Mark Ribble's work around developing those critical mindsets to understand there's always a digital footprint. So going back to Will Richardson's work. And finally, I do want to take the remaining time just to talk briefly about place-based literacies and learning that Dr. Iris Berger and I here at the UBC have been doing a lot of work with place-based learning pedagogies with teacher candidates, and actually now with graduate students. It's sort of morphed based on our projects that we're doing. But one of the key things that we had in our digital place-based literacies project was this idea of a digital community map. So when we get our kids to go, or when we get our teacher candidates to go out into the world and sort of explore place, it's really been sort of suggested that it's sort of more engaging and getting kids to reflect back on place, because place is a part of everything that we do, by engaging in a community map. So community map is a process by which a map is produced by the inhabitants. So you may it's sort of simply, I think the best way to sort of think about it is like Google Maps, and you know how you can pin things on Google Maps and you can see pictures. But with a digital community map, and with the project that we did with our primary years cohort here, is that we had teacher candidates go out and sort of pin different locations that they were noticing in place. And then whether it's sound clips or reflections, and then we were going back to those to sort of talk about that. But within the context of community mapping, it really sort of gets you to think about equity, community, and agency more specifically. So when the students engage in community mapping, which they did in our project, it critically allows them to examine sort of those pedagogical choices they might do, why I chose a particular place over another, sort of looking at their own biases. And I think that's sort of really interesting, and have a more thoughtful conversation around place. So some of the tools that we use for this particular project, in case you ever want to take this up yourself, simple things, and it may not even be so much as a Padlet. I mean, it's free. You can, and I'll show you an example in a minute. But also, like, there's a lot of open sources out there. So Open ETC, which one of the things that we often have, at least in Alberta, where I used to teach in BC, is, and I'm sure it's the same in Quebec, is around our Freedom of Information and Privacy Acts, but where information has to be stored. And in digital context, especially when it comes to our K-12 kids, usually the laws tell us that we need to store the information on a Canadian server. So that becomes a concern for school districts more particularly. So we looked for things like an open source, and this Open ETC had a very nice little sort of WordPress version that we could use, but there's lots out there that you can use. So what I want to sort of invite you to think about is, what can this look like in my own classroom? Like, how can I engage my kids in place? And using digital technologies to support the conversations that we have. So I might explore place in my community, and with digital technologies, I might be intentionally using it to reflect on the learning that happened or engage with place more. So if I capture a picture and I put it on, going back to that page there, mapping it on my digital community map, then later we can come back in the classroom and have a conversation about, why did you map that? What was that about? To tell me more about it, right? And building that sort of oral language and the written and writing for our ELL kids is sort of critical there. I think engaging in place in more meaningful and critical ways, because sometimes when we go back to a place a second time, I know when I take a walk now and I'm looking down, up and around, I notice things a little bit more critically. But if I've taken a picture and I go back to this picture, I might see things that I didn't see when I was actually there. So that's one way of using sort of digital technologies to explore place more intentionally in your place, and then also to capture new experiences and learning. So an example is, like, I've been taking this up with my teacher candidates in the B.Ed classes. Most recently, I asked my teacher candidates, and you can use this with your K-12 kids, which would be very similar. So I gave my students this prompt: take a walk and notice the street signs and names. What do you notice? What does it tell you? Another thing that I actually told them to do too as well is what looks different out in the world, right? And so what you see on the page is the Padlet, and all of my students did was they took different pictures on their walk about things that they were noticing that were different, that they hadn't noticed before. And then from that became a provocation for a greater conversation in our classroom. But I could see this as being a provocation for an inquiry unit. Maybe you're starting a math unit and you're looking at, like, I don't know, shapes. And you're getting your kids to go in place and take pictures of different shapes that they see, and then they're dropping it on a Padlet. And then later you're going back to that and having a conversation and revisiting those pictures, but also linking it back to the unit of shapes that you're doing in your math class. So just different ways, like you could use Jamboard or Padlet. I used Padlet for this because it just seemed a little easier, but Jamboard works just as well. So I often get asked, like, what other resources do you do when it comes to place-based literacy? So here are some books that I've been sort of reading and taking, and I integrate that with the digital technology pieces that I told you about earlier, like the digital community map or the Padlet opportunities and so forth. So just wanted to share some of the resources that have sort of inspired the work that I'm doing. But I guess that is the ending of my session, and I want to give some time for some questions because I went quite quickly through my slides. But thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everyone again. So when you're on full screen mode, it's sort of hard. Thank you. Are there any questions? I couldn't even see the chat. I'm so sorry.
No, they weren't in the chat. I
Okay.
will very quickly include the link for our website. And yeah, if anybody wants to ask a question, we're such a small group. I don't even know if you need to raise your virtual hand, but feel free to ask away.
I have a question, but it's more of a technical question about the research. So I'll ask it and then we can have a longer chat maybe at another time, Melanie. But I'm just curious about how you chose the ballet school. That's more of a question of how you selected your participant, which is really interesting to me on a research kind of basis, and what was the goal working with that school in particular. So it's not completely related to the topic, it's a little on the side, so I can leave it out there, and if there's other question more specific to the teaching in the classroom, we can definitely go with that, but I'll leave it there for now.
I can briefly answer that. Genevieve, I've been really lucky. I know a lot of people. They keep asking me. I have a lot of networks from my years of teaching, and I did a lot of provincial and beyond provincial work. So I was lucky enough that during that time, someone asked if I would come into the school, and that's how I ended up there. And I dragged Dr. Graham Lee into. That's how he got roped into. So, and I was lucky enough to have him. But yeah, no, that would probably be the answer I could give you. But that kid in particular, she's not the only one. Our little tiny research team looked at the data and they're like, well, there was multiple kids that like that, but that one in particular was very interesting.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I have a question regarding ChatGPT. I'm very glad to hear that you're so positive with the technology and how it can be used critically in the classroom. And because I hear a lot of negative feedback and how we should avoid using it. But I think the suggestions that you gave really allows us to see how we can engage it in a more meaningful way with our students. I've seen some language teachers using it to help students to write dialogue with AI, and see how, because when you put in your sentence and the AI will respond and then rephrase it in a way that it's appropriate. So that is also a very good learning experience. Do you have any other like resources or talks that you will recommend? You mentioned that you are going to so many webinars, and I really would love to be part of those also to learn a bit more.
Sunny, if I see anything, I'll pass it your way. I'm actually part of the Emerging Media Lab at UBC. I'm a faculty in residence there. So there's been a big discussion with, because there's many of us across the UBC. So the biggest thing, like I know the upcoming EL or EML showcase is going to be showcasing, there's going to be a discussion about ChatGPT at the beginning. So I wish you could come. I don't think it's going to be in Zoom though, but if it is, I'll send you the link because we're all going to be sitting there having a discussion about that. But I know they had a previous webinar on that topic, so I can send that to you as well because I was in attendance too. But yes, there's lots of sort of different things out there. I just happen to see them, and I think it's maybe the people I follow on Twitter. And then I'm just like, click, right? And I'm immediately going there. But I have to say, and I'll be honest with you, Sunny, it's almost like, it's like the catch thing right now, right? So everyone wants to talk about it. And I don't think we need to be scared about it as much as like, how do we use it more effectively? There are resources out there. Like, I think the biggest thing is like, playing with it, to be honest. Like, do we really need someone to teach us? As teachers, we have sort of this background. We know what's good and what's not. But if we don't try it, then how do we know if it's useful or not, right? So I think the biggest thing that I would say is don't be scared. Like, I was just going to share, like, I'll share my screen right now. Let's just, can you see this right now? So I'm in ChatGPT right now. So like, basically it's like, get yourself an account, it's free, and then type things to it and then it generates things. So I could just like physically ask it, like, generate or tell me a story. I don't know. See, it's telling me a story now, right? Look at that. So like, I mean, and I can stop it from generating, but I can be more specific than tell me a story. It can be, it can be like, tell me a story about bears, or tell me a story that is appropriate for a grade 3 student, right? Or whatever it is. So I think it's about also playing with it and having like that interaction with it. I know a friend of mine she's so obsessed with this now. She's using it. She's like, I actually like, get it to create rubrics for me and so forth. She's like, it's amazing, right? And I don't, like, I mean, I've been looking at it more from a textual piece, but I can see so many different things you can do with it. So I think the biggest PD for yourself, if you want to say, is go and try it out. Like, don't like just sit back and let everyone else tell you what's going on. Because it's not really that awful. And I think if we critically engage our kids in conversations where they know what they shouldn't be doing, they're probably less likely to do it, right? So, or at least from my experience. So yeah, no, I will send you something, Sunny. There's lots of
thank you so much.
lots of stuff out there. Any other questions? Just call out.
Yeah, it's not really a question. There's so many amazing ideas in your presentation. I felt like I was in a wind tunnel as they all flew past.
Sorry,
So I'm really
I tend to go really fast.
I'm really looking forward to watching the video again and sort of slowing it down and thinking about some of the things. But I love what you said about ChatGPT. I've been using it a lot, just playing around with it, as you said. And I think the advice to play with the technology is one of the best. That's why kids are so much better at technology than we are, because they're not as scared of it.
I think you've got and I keep thinking back to Wolwin and how she said play is literacy.
Yeah.
So if we're not scared to do that ourselves, then why, you know what I mean? That's a literacy. So why can't we just learn it, right? And just have fun. And
Yeah.
that's part of the beauty of it. Like maybe ChatGPT is one of your centers during center time and you're letting your
Yep.
kids just play with it, right? That is something ideal. And then also having an critically engaged, I think the older they are, the more you can use it as a tool to sort of enrich that learning piece. Whereas the younger ones, it might start with just, let's just try asking it questions and having conversations with it and having that dialogue. Because we don't, until they've actually had an interaction with it and how to use it appropriately, then they're more likely to know how to use it than if we just don't teach them, which would be a
Oh,
problem.
absolutely. And getting ahead of them and sort of saying you're aware of it and teaching some critical thinking skills.
Mhm.
Like I played with it with my son, and we saw that it was really good at writing a poem for his English class, but it was terrible at giving directions in Montreal, in the city where we live. It would get, if you followed the directions, you'd be totally lost.
I heard it was really good at doing code. So if you're into
Yes.
HTML coding and you're not
Yeah,
able to
apparently.
sort of do the coding, you can actually ask it, which is sort of nice for someone like me that's always trying to like copy code somewhere. Like I need to embed an image. I'm like, I don't know how to write this. I'll look it up, right? So that's sort of a nice sort of tool. But yeah, don't be scared to use it. I think that's
Yep.
definitely the way to go, right? So any other questions or you know, I'm just an email away. I'm really pleased that I get an opportunity. Thank you so much for inviting me to come to talk. I love sharing my research actually is still ongoing. Genevieve, the last one. Literally I just saw them. Yes, I'll see them tomorrow morning. And it was funny. I was just at a conference and I brought Money Puck is one of the participants in there, and Money Puck is so funny. I saw Money Puck the day after the conference and I was laughing. So it's really cool to still be sort of collecting it, but also have an opportunity to share with you what's going on. But there's some really solid stuff there in terms of practice. And one of the things that I could say is it's very different than emergency remote learning because everyone knows what they're doing now.
Well, thank you so much. We are just about at time. So I want to thank you very much for coming, and thank you for everyone else who came and watched and participated. Just a reminder that the webinars take place on the first Tuesday of every month. If you're not on our email list, put your email address in the chat and we will get you on the email list and you will get an email reminding you for the next one. And if you have any more questions or are curious about something, you can contact us through the For Real contact page, which is on the link that I put in the chat. You can go there and there's a contact button. So it's on the website. And so thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you, Melanie.
Melanie.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I'm trying to get out of here. I'm like, I haven't been in Teams in so long.
You can do it. You can do it.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Bye.
Well, thank you so much, Melanie.
Oh, it's nice to meet
Thank
you all.
you.
Thank
Nice
you.
meeting you.
Bye-bye.
Lovely to meet you too.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
The recording
Bye.
we need to turn off.
Oh, okay. Stop recording.
Bye.